In this video, I'm going to talk about 5 tax-free countries specifically for U.S. citizens. Stick with me. Hey guys, I'm Andrew Henderson, and if you'd like to learn how Nomad Capitalist can help you create a holistic offshore plan to legally reduce your taxes and live the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle, go to nomadcapitalist.com. And it's from talking to and working with hundreds of folks and hearing from many, many thousands of you who write to us and leave comments and share your ideas that I had the idea to make a video about tax-free countries specifically for Americans. Now, 1 or 2 of these are particularly open to Americans more than anyone else. And some of them are just the ones that I've heard your feedback on that I think are a good place for people from the United States to move. Because let's be honest, as with anything in business, as with anything in life, you can collect as many options as possible. I know that's a common thing in this industry. And you can, but until you take action, until you go and live somewhere, you're not lowering your taxes. And so I do think what's important is understanding what are the things that you value about where you're from, what are the things that you want in the place where you might want to move. And so I think if you're from the United States, moving to Laos, for example, not a tax-free country, but moving to Laos would be a culture shock. And you might just say, you know what, no matter how much money I save, I'm not moving to Laos. So that's the idea I took when making this video. We've got plenty of other videos on tax-free countries around the world. This one is for Americans. Now, country number 1, not technically a country, Puerto Rico, part of the United States. You've probably heard about Act 20, Act 22. They've got different tax benefits. They've got all kinds of different ways that you can legally reduce your taxes to 0%, 4%, somewhere in that vicinity. Now, what's interesting is some of the tax lawyers that I work with, we have interesting conversations where we do think that sometimes Puerto Rico is a bit of an overhyped option. What I've recently told people is anytime you see something plastered everywhere, you want to be careful because some people make it out to be easier than it actually is. Okay, so you want to make sure you're following the rules. Okay, you can't move to Puerto Rico, for example, get your capital gains exclusion, sell the company you've owned for 20 years the next day, and just not pay any tax. It's not like that. So Puerto Rico is interesting in that, unlike a lot of other places, getting there sooner and then keeping your business and running that business longer can often be a benefit. Depending on what kind of income you generate, if you're generating capital gains, if you're doing trading, this could be a great opportunity. For business, you can pay a single-digit tax rate. And there's different things that you can do. Now, again, you want to do proper planning because if you've got a business all over the world, that has to be rectified with Puerto Rico. Okay, so my concern about Puerto Rico is that people treat it as, oh, it's kind of part of the U.S. I don't have a passport, so therefore, I hear in the comments section, I'll just get a cigarette boat and go to Miami in the dark of night. Nobody will know. Or people say, I'll do 6 months in Puerto Rico and then 5 months and 28 days in California, and that'll really be my home, but I'll just kind of put in my time in Puerto Rico. There are a number of tests you want to satisfy. So while Puerto Rican can be a great option, I think it's a decent option for business owners. If you like the idea of living in Puerto Rico, I think it's a great option for Americans who wish to keep their U.S. citizenship and are engaging in more passive income strategies. But you want to make sure you know how it works. It's not just as simple as moving to Puerto Rico and being done. Now, country number 2 is one I've often talked about because I've said if you can move from California or Illinois or Massachusetts to Florida to save tax, okay? People commonly do that, right? If you can do that, then you can move to Puerto Rico. If you can do that, you might as well move to Panama, or at least you could move to Panama. Panama is country number 2. Now, I've been to Panama a number of times. Panama to me is a place that really appeals to Americans. Panama City, some call it the Miami of Latin America. It is not cheap. It's not a cheap place to live. It doesn't give me all the things that I'm looking for personally, but I know that a lot of Americans like to go and live in Panama. And so Panama basically says, hey, if you run a business outside of Panama, we're not going to tax that business. If you have activity outside of Panama, we're not going to tax that. Now, with any of these so-called territorial tax countries, there's always questions of proper planning for, hey, are you running the business from the country? How should that work? Should there be a little bit of tax for what your work is? Generally speaking, I think Panama is pretty tax efficient for an American who wants to go, run a business where the activity is happening somewhere else, and be able to spend, theoretically, the entire year living in Panama. If you like outside of the city, there's plenty of areas outside of Panama that people like, plenty of expat communities, and so if your goal is to find people that make you feel at home, I think you'll find a lot of that in Panama. Number 3 is Portugal. Now, Portugal is another country that a lot of people from the United States like to move to. One of the things that I know growing up in the United States is people love the idea of Europe. Remember my high school Spanish class, right? All the girls cooing over going to Spain. Oh, it's Spain. And even today I hear about a lot of folks who like the idea of living in Spain. Helping a few folks right now who would like to live in Spain. The lower tax version of Spain, that's a bit more efficient, a bit less bureaucratic in my opinion, still bureaucratic, but a bit less than Spain, is Portugal. Now, Portugal has a tax exemption. It lasts for 10 years. So like Puerto Rico, it's not indefinite. You can't live there for the rest of your life. But while that tax exemption has some holes to it, and while it does require proper planning, again, it's not just bring your Cook Islands company with your Nevis bank account and you'll never pay a penny. There's some planning that's needed. You can, depending on how you earn your income, live there tax-free. So you'll want to get some planning for Portugal. But really, if your interest is in living in the European Union, which is notoriously high tax, and you don't want to be living my trifecta lifestyle and bouncing around to different bases every 3 or 4 months, Portugal's not a bad place to put down roots. Just make sure you do your planning. The kicker is, there's the possibility of actually getting a European Union citizenship, which could make being not an American, or at least having a plan B in your passport portfolio, that could be a very attractive option as well. Country 4 is one I've talked about a lot, and that is Georgia. I mentioned Georgia for Americans because they love Americans in Georgia, really more than anyone else. And so while some of the immigration procedures have gotten more difficult over the years, and that's a boat that has probably sailed for easy residents, it's still possible to buy a home there relatively affordably. It is possible to do immigration. It's also possible as a U.S. citizen just to show up and stay for 360 days on a tourist visa. And so Georgia also has a territorial tax system. Georgia's been doing some very interesting things where Georgian companies, for example, follow the Estonian model in a sense, where you can theoretically pay no tax on your retained earnings in your company until you take the money out. Now, the challenging thing, if you're an American, is that the systems of a lot of these countries around the world don't always match up with the U.S. tax system. And so for that reason, and because Georgia does eventually tax your company when you take the money out at 20%, having a company there may not be the best option. People come to me and said, Andrew, I set up my company in Georgia the way you said to. I said, I never said that. I said, consider Georgia as a country. And so the territorial system there works where, again, you want some planning. If you're working in your company, you probably want to set aside some money to handle that. I'm not going to give you tax advice in this video, but the territorial system isn't quite as pure there. That said, you can earn money in foreign corporations, you can make investments overseas, you can do all kinds of deals and pay essentially no tax if you live there. That said, if you do want to do deals in Georgia and you decide that living there full time, you're inspired to buy some of their cheap real estate, residential rental income tax is very, very low. So even if you were to earn some money there, I think it's not a bad place to be. Number 5 is a place that I personally call home part of the year, and that country is Malaysia. A lot of people like Southeast Asia. I think Thailand could fit in here very easily as well. I would put Thailand as a number 5. But for me, Malaysia, if you're just starting out, especially if you're a little bit older, especially if you have a family, especially if you have kids, Malaysia is going to give you a bit more of what you're used to in the United States than perhaps anywhere in Southeast Asia. Because go and look at apartments in Singapore, in Thailand, in the Philippines. Of course you can find big apartments, but the standard apartment you're going to see is going to be relatively small. I remember when I was a lot younger, going around Bangkok and looking at apartments, it was like 42 square meters, 500 square feet barely, and like 2 bedrooms, just really small. When I went to Malaysia, you have lots of wide open apartments and homes. It's the only country in Southeast Asia where if you want to buy a home, you can own what's called landed property. And so if you want to have your own home with your yard, Malaysia is going to be the best place to do that. If you want a more spacious place to live, because after all, in the US, homes are bigger, I think you'll probably feel more comfortable in Malaysia. English is more widely spoken. than in a lot of other Southeast Asian countries. And so I think that, that's a reason. I really like being part of the scene in Kuala Lumpur. I've run into a lot of people there. It's nice for me because I can go to, Super Western, sit and have a coffee at the Mega Mall, one of the best malls in the world. I can go and get great health care. Or I can go dive in at one of my favorite, Indian restaurants with locals. Or, I can go and hang out, with a local Chinese or whatever the case may be. In that regard, because it's multicultural, because you have those Western comforts, along with being able to dive in, I've somewhat called it, the United States, but only the good parts. No country's perfect, but from a tax perspective, you can live there. Again, a little bit of planning needed, but your foreign source income will be exempt. And so depending on what you're doing, you could pay either zero or very little. And it's actually a pretty efficient place to do things like set up your lease, buy a property, handle bureaucracy. Planning is required, but the actual doing is does not involve that much drudgery. So those are 5 countries, 6 if you count Thailand. That's not a bad one if you're a bit younger generally. Younger people tend to like to go to Thailand more. I don't see as many 45-year-olds who are intrigued by Thailand, but that could work. So there are 5 or 6 countries, depending on how you want to look at it, that are very tax-friendly for U.S. citizens. What are your comments? Which of those countries would you like to move to? Leave a comment below. I'd like to hear from you. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.